What's up? So today we start the 10th or 100th or 1000th upgrade of the rack, hopefully to finally get something into production, but seriously this time. And the update today is pretty small, but is in preparation for a bigger update, which is a new firewall and a new switch. Reason for changing the firewall and the switch is to create a multi-tenant network with CloudStack, which for some reason was not possible with Ubiquiti. I was using the UDM Pro, and for some reason every time you create a network with a subnet, it needs to have a specific VLAN associated to it. When networking-wise, it doesn't make sense to have a one-to-one relationship between VLANs and subnets. You can have a subnet with various VLANs, but for some reason Ubiquiti doesn't allow it, or maybe I just don't know how to use Ubiquiti. Anyways, I'm updating to Juniper, and also CloudStack does have a pretty tight integration with the Juniper SRX firewall lineup, and so that's going to help a lot with automating the creation of tenant networks and so on, and so that's going to be particularly useful. And since I wanted to update the firewall, I also updated to a Juniper switch, which I also needed a bigger switch because I only had enough ports for one interface per server. I have 5 hosts, and ideally I need 9 interfaces, 2 interfaces per the cluster hosts, cluster as in virtualization cluster with KVM, but also storage cluster with Ceph, and then I have the other node, or actually host, which is just running the CloudStack management server and the NFS server. And so the topology here is going to be, networking-wise, one interface on each of these 5 hosts, which is dedicated to management networking and also secondary storage networking in CloudStack, which is used for templates and snapshots. Although since I'm using Ceph, I can use the Ceph RDB snapshot feature, which I will use. And the other port will be dedicated for Ceph. And then also the management interface will also carry out guest traffic, both public and private. I will be segregating the networks logically, but physically it's going to be that layout. Now, I am going to install some new DACs to support this network. I'm also redoing all of the CAT cables I had for the management interfaces. And also, without no particular reason, I decided to change my power cables for them to be color-coded. And that's just, I guess, OCD, but also in the future, I hope to have redundant power sources. Right now, I have one UPS, which is connected to one single breaker, which has protection, but if that breaker flips, then everything is on UPS power. Ideally, I'd have 2 UPSs and both of them on separate breakers, also because my UPS doesn't support 2 power input sources, or otherwise I'd just have one UPS to 2 different breakers. That would be a pretty simple change to make. But nonetheless, I decided to, since everything except the firewall actually has redundant hot swap power supplies, I'm using one cable one color cable per the redundant sort, so I can in the future upgrade and know these power supplies are going to this input source and these ones are going to that source. And so that's basically upgrade. The next video is going to be much more interesting, where I'll be installing the firewalls and the switch, but I guess that's it for now. Okay, quick rack tour. Here you can see the deceased UDM Pro. Actually, it's well and alive, but it's being decommissioned and put on sale. And here in the rack, we have very little stuff. We have one Dell R630, which is the management server. Currently, only 2 of the caddies have SSDs. And so that's being used for the management server and the NFS server for VM templates, ISOs, and stuff. And this big boy is actually a Dell C6400, which is just a chassis for a multi-blade server, and it has 4 blades of the Dell C6420, and they have some specs which I'll go over in a moment. And then over here we have the APC UPS. This is a 2200 VA UPS, so it does allow me to have a pretty decent runtime with these guys running. Now, the management server / NFS server has pretty modest specs. It's just 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM, ECC RAM of course, and it has 2 500 gig SSDs, SATA SSDs, and it has, I don't quite remember the CPU names, but it has 4 virtual CPUs. And then down here, and this guy, as you can see, these are blade servers. And so these guys have 128 gigs of RAM, actually 256 gigs of RAM, both of these two, and then the other ones have 128 each. I really want to put the whole cluster to 1 terabyte of RAM, although I don't really need to, but just to match the specs and OCD purposes, I guess. And these guys have 24 virtual CPUs per each CPU, so that's 48 virtual CPUs per blade, for a total of, I hope my math is not wrong, 196 virtual CPUs for the whole 4-node cluster. All of the servers have dual SFP plus interfaces, so 10 gig. For my purposes, I don't really need faster networking or more bandwidth. Because I have, in this Ceph cluster, what I do have is 3 OSDs per node, so a total of 12 OSDs, and these are 2 terabyte SATA SSDs, so they're not particularly fast. I'd really like to build an NVMe cluster, but that's expensive as fuck, and so that is not happening anytime soon. And then each of the nodes has a 500 gig SATA SSD for DOS, and this poor guy doesn't even have a caddy because I misordered when I was buying more caddies, but well, it is what it is. And so now, what I will be doing is connecting everything with these new cables. I also bought a different PDU, or actually I guess it is a PDU, but it is a dumb PDU. I couldn't find any decently priced managed PDUs, so I could switch off individual ports. Although my UPS does have 4 ports which I could switch off because it has a management card. Here, as you can see, 4 ports is not really enough, and so whatever, and I'm just connecting everything to this PDU, and going to connect the 2 servers now, also run the cables for the firewall and the switch, which are going to be installed up here. And yeah, basically that's it. Also running the DACs for the SFP plus interfaces, maybe doing some CAT cables, and when on Monday the firewall and switch arrive, I guess we'll be doing the other stuff. So, update. We have now racked the DAC cables and all the power. I think it is a pretty clean job, and so we got everything started from the PDU, all the 2 groups, looped per group, and then looping the 2 groups together, then going to each PSU. Pretty good job. Those going over there until the firewall and switch are in place, and then connecting all SFP plus interfaces. And so the blue on the power is for the passive, and the red is for the active, or in this case, I guess all PSUs actually distribute the load, but you know what I mean, main and secondary. And then for the SFP plus interfaces, blue is management, secondary, storage, and guest public and private traffic, and then the orange is dedicated to primary storage or Ceph traffic, both front end and back end. And so I guess that is it. And then this cable hooks here to run it to the front of the rack where the switch will be. Probably the cables are going to be a bit too long, the DACs, and I'm going to have to loop them over here, which will make it a bit more messy, but I mean, it is what it is. I still have to make some CAT cables for the management interfaces. iDRAC over here, iDRAC, and on that side, and then on the UPS, but it's going to follow the same logic, all going through here and then into the firewall. I don't have any RJ45 switch, so I'm just going to plug it into the firewall, which has some ports, and that's going to be about it for today. When the firewall and switch arrive, we're going to rack them and make some cables, and I guess finish everything up physically, and then on to the logical deployment. So yeah, that's about it.